So for our next speaker, I decided to welcome Daniel Tompkins. He's our faculty for agriculture at Mars University. Uh, Daniel's there and jump on. You have the floor, Daniel.
Well, thank you, Cole. So you're starting a couple minutes late, so I'll get right to it. Daniel Tompkins, Doctor of Plant Medicine. Mars Explorer, I guess, technically since probably about 2015, where I kind of caught the Mars bug, if you will, and what's going on with SpaceX and colonizing a planet. This sounds interesting and challenging. And I've always liked challenges. Working in agriculture, I took on plant pathology as a doctor of plant medicine, as it's always changing, it's always dynamic. There's always some new insect or pest or problem to solve out in agriculture, and it really brought me into it. And I've had a lifelong passion for plants. So I've worked in everything from organic production, CSA, community supported agriculture, to large scale industrial, international agricultural systems. In a variety of different segments of the industry, from lab research to fertilizers. I've really spread myself wide and pretty deep as well. So I'm excited to teach a course on Mars agriculture, because I think it's a really interesting context for understanding not just agriculture on Mars, but the future of agriculture on Earth as well. Really, when we're talking about anything on Mars, right, it's really just futuristic stuff here that we're going to need on Earth. So again, worked as a doctor of plants, right, diagnosing all the different problems that plants can have, insects, diseases, nutritional, viruses, plants get them as well, understanding the epidemiology of it out in the field and everything. And Mars was an interesting context because you're starting from scratch. You hopefully we won't be bringing so many of these things along with us. So it's almost therapeutic for me to have this interest in Mars, because it's okay. You can control maybe some of these problems a little bit better, kind of agriculture reinvented, if you will. So what was the goal of agriculture? What is the goal of Mars agriculture? What do we need to do here? And I liked how some of the previous speakers spoke on scalability here, and we need to expand output by 1.1% annually, on an annualized basis. And why is that? Because our population will, if it's similar to Earth during this pretty rapid period of growth, that's what the rate is right now, 1.1%. So we have to be able to expand that food out, that production system by this much. And it takes a lot of, I call it the B problems, right? It's the billions problems. We're over 7 billion people here on Earth. And we're using billions, 4 or 5 billion hectares in order to provide food for those people. How do we, from not just from an environmental standpoint, but from a humanitarian standpoint, how do we keep this moving forward? Is I think a premier challenge of our generation. So we've had all these innovations along the way that have helped spur along this agricultural output to match our population. And it's really been fundamental. And a lot of it's been oil driven, right? All that energy and oil has been used to a large extent. We don't have that on Mars. So that's another fundamental aspect of Mars agriculture, is you're automatically post oil, you're post fossil fuels for really large scale problems. And, a lot of discussion goes around, how is this going to be produced? Are there going to be animals in it? Is it going to be, algal based? Is it going to be food based? And the actual energy that goes into agricultural production is only 20%. There's so much to the food equation outside of that we really have to consider. So in the course, we didn't go into so much the embodied energy of, do you make milk from a cow and have the cow go out and eat the grass, or do you, make, almond milk type of thing? We didn't get into that level of detail. Really, I presented in this class both the challenges and the unique opportunities that the environment of Mars brings. But pretty open to a lot of different approaches. And again, agriculture is much more than food, right? You're producing the chemical feedstock base for, plastics and everything else that you need on Mars. So from building materials to your chemical supply, to your lab supply, how much of this is going to be biologically derived versus synthetically derived. There are efforts to do, synthetic chemical production, but those are highly energy intensive. We have fusion on Mars. It's just a little bit farther away. How much of that sunlight can we use and convert that into the things that we need? And again, the challenge isn't that astronomical. We have to grow this at 1.1% a year. I mean, any economic model, that would be a horrible situation. So, how can we do this passively and was a focus of this course, and scalable, and really scale it. At the plant physiological level, there's also a lot of opportunities. So we did we kind of went from plant biology 101 quickly into, a lot of the futuristic opportunities around genetic engineering and stuff. And this energy balance here of how a plant uses the incoming energy is really insightful, and that there are unique opportunities here for plant biology on Mars that haven't really been considered much. So I'll kind of leave it at that without diving too deep into it, but just, from the macro scale to the cellular scale here, there are opportunities for really increasing and having a passive system at the end of it. So we talked about greenhouse production schemes and all the inputs there to kind of, all the different schemes and the benefits versus the risks of different aeroponics and hydroponics. We walked through those, and again, at the biology end, which is really that dynamic that everyone tries to put their thumb on, right? What's the biology going to do? Because that's really going to drive these systems. What can we exclude versus what can't we exclude? Well, we know it's not going to be a sterile environment. We know we're going to bring our microbiome with us. We know that the soil that we create is not going to be microbe free either, because our microbiome is coming with us. And those similar types of microbes, well, we pick those up from the soil environment. So that they're gonna go in and colonize these environments, and we're gonna bring them with us regardless. So you are what you eat, and most people neglect that. We're more non-human than we are human. We have more microbes in us and on a cell count number than we do have human cells, because microbes are smaller. So we'll be bringing more non-human with us to Mars than we will be human. That's just kind of an interesting thing. And then what are the implications of this? How do you make sure that you limit pathogens and limit problems that will come up, because there will be problems. You won't have the traditional plant diseases, insects and weeds, but you will have similar things fit those niches, and kind of oddball things pop up within these biological systems. So we looked at some Earth-based we did some case studies on Earth-based similarities and packing houses and stuff, fruit and vegetable packing houses, where they have some similar problems. We talked about how to plan out a menu. So Christopher Wolf has this as an open source menu tracker and planner, and we looked into how do we scale this, and what are all the options. So took some case studies and played around with what does a Martian menu look like, and then what are the real critical failure points, like prions. Not discussed too much. They're hard to detect. They're incredibly hard to treat. And we're talking about closed loop systems. So how are these mitigated? On a systems level, how is this segregated? How is it treated? Where are these critical failure points, and also critical opportunity points that haven't really been discussed so much when talking about growing plants in space? There's a lot of fun stuff to dig into. And we've talked about design. Okay, how are we designing this all? Whether you're talking about a food packing house, bringing stuff in, and from a food safety standpoint, or from a laboratory standpoint, how do you have clean operations, and how do you design and set everything up, is also kind of a key consideration to figuring out this puzzle, because it's a flow. It's going to be cyclical. It's going to be a flow. It's a lot of different designs have been presented. We went through some of those as case studies as well. And then at the end of the day, right, this is what we have left on Earth. is, out of 71% of habitable land, we're using up roughly half of that for agriculture. And roughly the other half of that is forests and stuff. So it's either, if we're going to keep expanding agricultural production, either it's going to need a lot more energy, which we're at the end of the oil. Hopefully cold fusion comes along. I'm a proponent of that, and synthetic biology and cellular agriculture, but that's a big leap. That's a generational leap. So there's going to be some gaps there that we have to fill in with new techniques and new science being brought out to fill those gaps. And same thing on Earth, or same thing on Mars. What percentage of that land are we going to have under agricultural production, and at what energy intensity? What's the embodied energy of that food on Mars, and how are we scaling those power supplies, or what's the minimal power supplies we need for real passive agriculture? Really, really fun to explore, and we had a great set of students that really dug into it at a bunch of different angles, and had surprisingly more human relevance than I had thought. And I did miss a slide here. I did want to go back. Looks like I took it out. We did go into, from a human health standpoint, kind of this pyramid of, what does human health and food look like? I'm always asked, as someone who works in agriculture, what do you think about organic? What do you think about conventional? What do you think about plants? What do you think about animals? And, it's this real complex pyramid between your genetics, your microbiome, and your environmental factors that you're exposed to. And what's on your food and stuff. And we kind of did an interesting dive into there, as a lot of these meal supplement plans, come about. Is it going to be kind of powderized, food that we haven't historically consumed, or is it going to be more whole foods that we have consumed? And your microbiome is different under those different diets. Not necessarily what we've evolved with. And there's a lot of link with human health, from cancer to autoimmune disease, and other health outcomes that are linked to this complex kind of pyramid. And then at what time are you exposed to these different things? So I did leave out that slide, unfortunately, but that was a really interesting discussion there around, how have humans kind of, how does human health and food really, what does all the data say, around environmental exposure, nutritional content, and what microbiome you're supposed to have. I mean, there's so much emerging stuff here. How do we put it all together? Because we do have an opportunity here for a fresh start, which is rather unique. And we do have a level of understanding that these things are super important. So at that, I will turn it over to questions, and thank you for having me.
Daniel, I'll ask a question. Really interesting, so thanks a lot. Great. I was wondering about, so actually just going back to Alfredo's talk as well, obviously you need light for photosynthesis, but Martian light comes with high levels of ultraviolet radiation. I guess it's not a big problem because you can screen it with glass, but what would you be thinking about in terms of how to grow plants on Mars? Would you envisage a purely hydroponic system with artificial light, or using natural Martian light? Well, what's the best way to grow plants in the environment like Mars?
We really focused on the thermodynamics of greenhouse operations, because that nighttime temperature is a fundamental limit. So how do you have a system, daytime passive solar heating actually looks pretty favorable on Mars, which is surprising. That was a surprising thing as I kind of went down this avenue a few years ago. But the nighttime temperature is, how do you move the plants? Do you concentrate the plants tenfold in an insulated environment to get through that night? And then what system best correlates with that? Is it raft-based hydroponics? Is it some other kind of techniques? So I think for me personally, I think we have to figure out how everything is being heated through that nighttime environment. What is the scheme for keeping these plants alive through the nighttime? And then what systems, and then also what crops are you growing? If you're growing an agronomic crop, if you're doing crops for like nutrient extraction, say you're growing weed species to extract plant essential nutrients, right? Fertilizers, essentially, right? Using, plants as basically miners, right? And getting your elements through there with pioneer species. That system may look totally different than, okay, this is strawberries and, this is fruits and vegetables and stuff. So I do think it will be, it should be variable, both from a risk analysis and from a needs-based approach.
Yeah, good, thanks.
I don't have a specific question for you, Daniel, but back to Charles's question. One way to mitigate the ultraviolet radiation is coating of the mirrors or coating of the glass. That's one of the best ways that we do it here on Earth is polarizing or coating the glass to prevent the ultraviolet or any other radiations from coming in. And then also too, there is a way that you can wick the heat off of the glass and store it like they do in England, where you store heat in bricks and other things that during the day for night use to conserve energy.
Yeah, sorry, going back to the question on UV, my understanding is the materials used in UV greenhouse mitigation are really low mass. So, if we can increase the UV protection and make those applications repetitively for any degradation, particularly if you're using plastic coverings for greenhouses, I think that's important. So, but from a GCR standpoint, from a radiation, I guess from a radiation total threshold, okay, is the plant in a totally different environment than an open greenhouse at night for GCRs in particular?
Heat storage, one quick comment, heat storage on Mars is going to be a huge advantage, having methods of storing heat during the day and irradiating it at night.
It's a little difficult to hear you, Alfredo.
Speak up a little bit.
Sorry about that. So just to add to what Terry was commenting, the main reason, or one of the main reasons why we are pushing very strong into the tunneling system is because the rock has so much mass inertia that it holds the temperature really well. So once we are able to heat up the inside environment, then it will hold it very well for the evenings. So we think it's a very efficient and not very expensive solution to solve that particular problem that you are mentioning, Terry.
And unless there's new information from InSight, my understanding is geothermal, any practical geothermal increase is a kilometer down. You get about 1 centigrade increase when you go a kilometer down on Mars. So our basic solution for that is, everyone talks about what's the green, what does the above look like, right? Is it plastic or glass? What is the underlayment? I think that's an important thing. Like aerogel is great for compressive forces. I think aerogel should be like an underlayment for a lot of these systems, especially if they're on the surface. It's great for compressive strength, not good for tensile strength. And also that cold Mars regolith is going to be a problem sitting on that all the time. So it's interesting. We don't, the floor isn't like a hot topic, when talking about Martian settlements, but I think it's an important one.